Hey, welcome to Select Arcane. Known only to my inner circle is my love for collecting bones and dead things, especially antlers. My collection is small, variety of gifts from others, or stuff I've collected while riding. One of my fondest memories from my teenage years was carrying this calf skull under my arm while galloping through a cow field while field hunting. I had to carry it for 2 hours before getting back to the trailer. But the most prized member of my collection is my quarter horse skull. On the model side of my spooky collection is this heavy hunter mare from Maggie Jenner Bennett. I honestly can't remember the year that I got this thing, but it was the exact same time that she released them for the first time. 5-7 years ago, maybe? Not entirely sure if she's still selling these, but they are real 3D scans from her real horse collection. Mine is number 4. It does say they're still available on her website, but check with Beth just in case. Some of the smaller skulls come in one piece, but mine comes in 2 pieces. Isn't the detail so neat with this thing? It's a 3D printed resin. And I should point out, because this is a little bit older, it has a lot of print lines. When you prime and start painting this model, it will show up. So we have to hide them to the best of our abilities. I start by using my diamond-coated file and going over the spurs, aka the supports that held up the print while it was being made. Maggie did all the hard bits before they were shipped out, and now it's my turn to refine them. To be frank, this is my first time doing a 3D printed resin, so it kind of freaks me out a little. I've heard these things are really fragile, and in my fingers, it really does feel like it. I try to be as delicate as possible by holding one end of the jawbone while filing. As you can see, there's a lot of movement if I do the other side, so I do not want to break this thing. It's rare that I use the bathroom sink in the studio, but here we are. I'm using my usual anti-grease dish soap and a toothbrush to scrub away at the bones, but I am being super careful. It's terrifying. And I make sure to get in all the little eye sockets and teeth. And I'm skipping right over that first layer of primer. I know, right? I already know that there's print lines and it's going to be bad, so we're going direct to Bondo. Unsure if there will be a chemical reaction based on the fact that it's a 3D print, I conferred with the Mares in Black Discord group. I got the thumbs up that it should be okay, so we're proceeding. I let the Bondo dry completely before proceeding. It only takes a few minutes. I crumble the larger parts off with my fingers, and then I go in with my diamond-coated file. I use it to take off the larger parts that I can't get with my fingers. Then I go in with my 180 grit sanding sponge. This is exactly like I would do for resin or briar. I want to make sure that the Bondo fills every single print line, but at the same time, bones are not perfect. They're not smooth and there's lots of rough texture on them. So there's a very fine balance with filling in those print lines and filling in the realism. Once I'm happy with my work, I go back to the sink and wash again. And when it's dry, I go out with the primer. I'm using my usual duplicolor sandable primer, this time in gray. Reason being, I'm almost out of white and it's a real pain to order. I had to specially order it. And secondly, I'm going to be using acrylics. Shocker, I know. I'm only going to be using 3 colors: Titan Buff, Black, and Burnt Umber. And I'm using Golden Brand because that's what I have. I start with the burnt umber and water it down till it's the consistency of milk. And then I go over the skull completely. The point is to wet the paint down enough so that it's semi-translucent so that some of the gray comes through. This is going to be our base. Once the skull dries, then I'm going in with the Titan Buff. I'm going to be using a technique called dry brushing. That means I take as little paint as possible on my brush, which is completely dry, take nearly all of that paint off, and then wipe it onto the model. This is going to add a very smeary texture, really only hitting the high areas of the model, and skipping all of those cracks and divots left behind. I covered the entire model this way, and now you can start seeing the teeth, some of the shading, the cracks, the divots, the holes, and it's starting to look like a real bone. If you don't have Titan Buff, a little bit of burnt umber and white will bring you to almost that color. Even after that first layer of Titan Buff, I keep going, adding more opacity to the skull with the Titan Buff. Remember to keep your brush light and keep dry brushing, don't pack on the paint. At this point it's looking more like a plastic Halloween skull, with not a lot of color and not a lot of definition, but clearly bone something. So I go back in with that first burnt umber layer and water the paint all the way down. Then I apply that to the entire skull in a very, very, very thin layer. Anything too saturated I wipe off with a tissue, which leaves some brown residue and a little bit more color. And now, if you really wanted to leave it as a fresh skull, you can. But if you want to weather it out, then I recommend this. Mix some black and burnt umber, water that all the way down to the consistency of milk, and then apply a tiny bit at a time to the skull and wipe off right away with a tissue. What's going to happen is that the paint is going to seep into the cracks and leave it looking dirty and distressed. This is called weathering, which is pretty typical in miniatures such as Warhammer. Use that tissue to dab away at that excess paint, and really make sure you get into the crevices like the eye sockets and under the jaw. And there you have it, a realistic looking skull. And remember, this can be used for any type of bone if you want to make zombie horses or a full skeleton or a skull like this. But hold on, there's 2 more steps. The acrylics by themselves are a little prone to chipping, so first I take some varnish, and it doesn't matter if it's matte or gloss in this case. I'm using Liquitiex brand because that's what I have, and I apply generously all over the skull. I leave it to dry, which only takes a few minutes, and then I go out and spray it with Testors dullcote. This not only covers up the glossy shine, but takes away that sticky feel of the Liquitiex. And now you're guaranteed that this skull is not going to be prone to chipping or breaking. Or finish work wise anyways. Now the skull can be used in a variety of performance setups, like when I was a kid in Pony Club, where guest vets would come in and bring in their horse skulls and bones to teach us about anatomy. Or maybe bidding clinics. Or in case you want to make a Marylude. Or whatever. You decide. I hope you liked this tutorial, and I hope you found it useful. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram @SelectArcane or on Facebook by the same name. Thanks for watching. Bye!